Hi, I'm Regan Robinson, your host of Future Fit, the only podcast unraveling the secrets of how the world's most innovative leaders stay future ready in a fast-paced world. I've spent over 20 years as a futurist and strategist, transforming top global brands and putting investment-backed startups on paths to sustainable growth. Along the way, I've become obsessed with new ways to prepare for the future, because thinking about the long term once a year simply isn't enough. In each episode, I talk with movers, shakers, and path breakers who share their stories about how they turn uncertainty into their strategic advantage. Throughout our journey, we'll discover unconventional and imaginative ways to help you thrive today while leading your teams into tomorrow. Future Fit leaders know that being prepared for what's next is more than a business decision. It's a way of being. Let's venture together as we co-create a new future readiness playbook. The future can't wait, and neither can I. So, are you ready to get future fit? Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Kristen Groh, an innovative leader with over 20 years of experience in digital product, marketing, technology, design, and strategy. Kristen is renowned for guiding companies to leverage digital capabilities to grow their business and is senior partner at Profit, a global consulting firm that helps leaders unlock uncommon growth. With over 600 strategists, data analysts, marketers, digital experts, and creatives, Profit has worked with the world's most successful companies, including CVS Health, Marriott, and Netflix. Kristen combines practical working knowledge with deep client centricity that drives enduring partnerships and measurable results, and has delivered successful outcomes for clients such as the J.M. Smucker Company, Caterpillar, and Estee Lauder. Kristen is passionate about finding and developing talent, constantly growing her own skills and knowledge, and building trusted relationships. And she has an MIT Sloan Executive Certificate in Technology Operations and Value Chain Management. Kristen thrives on unraveling complex challenges, and so I am incredibly excited to hear what she has to share with us today. Welcome to the show, Kristen.
Thank you, Regan. Nice to be here. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you today.
Likewise. So let's dive into our conversation with a question that I ask all of my guests, which is, what does future ready mean to you?
Yeah, I love this question. I loved listening to all your other participants talk about it. For me, it really it really comes down to curiosity. I'm just like ridiculously curious. I went to art school, and I think a lot of what they teach you at art school is how to be curious, how to think about things and really dive in. They also teach you how to be really resilient to a lot of negative feedback when you have to stand up in front of a classroom and let all of your peers rip into your work. But for me, it's how do you consistently learn new things? You know, I came out of college in the late 90s. The internet thing was starting to bubble up a little bit, and I had really very little exposure to it. I remember in school, one of my teachers was like, I'm going to put your artwork on this new thing. It's called Mosaic, and it's on the internet. And I was like, what? But what? It was great. And I came out, and I had some early leaders who kind of really embraced my curiosity, and they would help me, encourage me to go learn new things. So I worked one of my first jobs was at Northrop Grumman, which sounds like an old stodgy place to work. But I had a leader there who was really like, wanted to understand technology and digital and thought this was going to be really important to bring to the marketing function. And so he sent me away to learn all sorts of new things. So I learned how to code. I learned how to build CD-ROMs and websites and how to do animation. And then I just took that and ran with it as the dot-com bubble started to inflate. And I was early on working on some really bizarre business models that people were coming up with, because internet was this brand new thing, and everybody and exactly, it was the wild, wild west. And so everybody was just like, let's throw a bunch of things at the wall and see what sticks. And so I got to be in that early on and have my hands dirty. And so that's been the thing that has fueled me throughout the duration of my career. Just like you talk about my MIT thing, I've also like on AWS certified. I've done the pathways for Salesforce just because I wanted to understand how it works. I'm never going to be writing code in the cloud. That's just not what I do anymore, but my clients care about these things, and these things are what's coming next. And so I need to always be in that mode of, how does this work? What is it? Why do I need to know about it? Which is why here I sit at age 50. I'm super pumped about this AI thing. I can't wait to see where it takes us as the next big boom of digital transformation. So.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's really insightful. I mean, we both share this curiosity. I've often been told I am the most curious person that folks have ever met. Continuous learning is core to who I am. If I'm not learning, I get bored. Earlier, we were talking about changing jobs a lot. And while I think historically that has been looked down upon, I think now people are starting to realize that the more experiences that you have, the more you get outside your comfort zone and try new things, especially as you get older, you start getting in your mid 40s and above, like us, you sort of hit this phase of your career where that actually, this diversity of experience, this curiosity, and this like desire to learn and not be afraid to try new things really becomes a superpower. You know,
Yeah.
I always like, I do believe curiosity and resilience, which we'll get to in a moment, but those are part of the future readiness recipe, and they are a strategic advantage. Curiosity may have killed the cat, but it can be like a major strategic advantage. And the other thing that sort of comes up for me is this idea of art. I've talked about this online a bit about how, like, if you think art, art is just about going to galleries, no, they've actually done research that really shows how you don't have to be even creating the art. You can be taking it in, you can be discussing it, how it widens your neural pathways, which then fosters your imagination and your creativity. So I think that everything that you just shared is a really insightful and a really unique combination of things that make up future readiness. Love it.
Yeah. I love your point about art, and I just want to hit on that for a second. Like I said, I went to art school, so I was painting and doing all these things, as many of my peers were in business classes. And as I got out of school and got into my career and had children and all those sorts of things, I got away from my artistic self. And I remember my mother took me to one of those paint and sips one time, and I'm sitting there painting, and like tears were coming to my eyes, and I was like, I have to bring this back into my life. And so since then, I've been very intentional about creating and finding ways to bring in some of these things that make me feel, that bring my emotion out, that aren't about writing a PowerPoint or crafting an email. So it's important to find that balance, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I also think people are starting to smarten up to the fact that we're not like two humans walking around the like Earth, where there's like the business side of us and then our life.
Right.
No,
It's one person.
Newsflash. Like, you can
Yeah,
be doing
exactly.
something that is, quote, a hobby or what have you, that is actually really fueling, especially if you do the type of work that we do. I can't say it applies to all careers, but when you're in this sort of like white space, innovative type of work where, the definition of the imagination is the ability to envision what does not exist today, right? And you like do work in
Exactly.
that area. Well, things like art, for me, it's horseback riding is one of the things that I do, which people are like, what? But it really does. It all really kind of, again, works. It's all a part of this future readiness and innovation recipe that for me has been game changing. And it sounds like for you as well.
Yeah, it just unlocks the mind. It helps you to
Yes.
separate out from the trenches a little bit and
Yeah.
open up to new things. So
So
yeah,
speaking of
great.
mindsets and minds, so you've talked about the fact that most companies aren't prepared for the hard work that follows an innovative idea, whether it's big or small. And that what is required, among other things, is being prepared for the constant recalibration that comes with doing something new and learning as you go. Exactly what
Yeah.
we're talking about. And this really resonates with me because I often find that folks aren't up for doing the constant recalibration that's required to build a future ready strategy, team, and company. And so, how do you approach ensuring that your team is ready for the hard work that follows an innovative idea? And what advice might you offer for leaders who are struggling with this constant recalibration?
Yeah, so a lot of it is, I would say, both with the teams that I work with and the various places I've worked in, and with my clients. We go out a change and we say, okay, we're gonna head in a new direction. We're gonna launch something new. We're gonna try something new. And the lens to that, the purview to that is often a little short, right? So it's like, okay, all we need to do is write the strategy on paper. And then we're good to go. We've communicated it. Everybody's ready to go.
One and done.
One and done. We told everyone what we're going to do, and so therefore it will happen.
By osmosis.
I exaggerate, obviously, but I've seen these moments where it's not tied all the way through to behaviors, right? And incentives and all of those things. So one of my favorite examples, I was working with a client and we were trying to change their behaviors from a very kind of manual process of doing things, a very like on the phone process, to something more digital that ultimately would improve the customer, the client's experience. And the teams were being asked to kind of log any requests that came in into the system. And then as they process it, check it off, that sort of thing. Your very typical IT workflow. And what we found was this one, there's all these different groups doing it, but they're all seeing this one platform. This one group, their workflow often took 6 months. It was the nature of their work. While another group's workflow maybe took 2 days, and that was long. Mm-hmm. So the group that took 6 months was afraid that they were going to look bad if they took 6 months. So they were logging their tickets, and then they were downloading a spreadsheet and clicking the tickets closed, and then working off the spreadsheet so that there wasn't a perception that they weren't doing their work fast enough. And so somehow they translated we're going to work this way down to, I am not going to look good if I'm not closing my tickets quick enough.
Wow.
And so we had to go in and shift the mindset around what are the things that you're being measured on versus this other group, and what are the expectations of your team versus this other group, and level set all of that so there didn't feel this pressure. So I think this idea that you have to really translate it all the way down to the front lines of what does it mean to this person who's been doing a job in a certain way forever, right? Likely. Now they have to change. How do you help them understand what matters in that change and what the expectations are? So I think that's something that's not always thought through and change. I think the other thing I've noticed is we don't always think through the ongoing investment and change, right? So we might plan for, okay, we're going to make this change this year. We're going to invest X number of dollars in this now. And we're going to expect to see this return on our investment within 6 months. It's going to start paying back. Then all of a sudden the funding isn't there. Like, oh, what's the plan for it? Are you rolling this into the regular operating model? Are you funding it separately, continuing on? And so especially when you think about incubation and innovation, and I've seen this with multiple clients where they'll have an innovation practice or pod that kind of sits outside of the core business, and they fund all these little pieces, but then there's no plan for longevity. There's no plan to take it from something that's a small idea to something that's part of the business. Yeah. And so that's really being thoughtful about the business model and where you're going to start to see the value come back into the core and for the investment to pay for itself in the long term. So that's something we work a lot with our clients on.
Yeah. So it's like building that bridge between what was the experiment or what was the prototype. And then, all right, what have we learned? How do we want to scale it? How do we want to integrate it? I think the story that you shared about the customer service team, it's fascinating / doesn't surprise me, right? Because my fundamental belief is the biggest problem that everyone is having is this idea around behavior change. And the fact that it is constant and ongoing, like the hill that I'm going to die on is that future readiness and strategy is a way of being. It is a mindset. It is not a one and done or annual activity that you check off your list. And until you recognize that and figure out what does that mean for people, all the way, like you're saying, bringing it down to the front lines, and communication has to be ongoing, and you're also funding it. To your point, this is why, what is it? I can't remember the latest data point. 80% of change efforts fail.
Yes,
fail. So tired of that stat. Again, these are hills I'm going to die on, right? The legacy I'm going to leave when I'm like 110 still working. And it's like, I just believe, I don't know if you, how you feel about this, but it's fear, ego, and laziness. Like either you can get on the bus and be like, all right, we recognize that this operating with a mindset of dynamic adaptability is something we have to invest in, right? And teach our teams to see change not as a threat, but as an opportunity to innovate further, be willing to kill your darlings and question every sort of like sacred cow in your company. Be ready to if you're not already disrupting yourself, you're already behind. And I think how you're approaching it both within your company and with your clients is really interesting. And that the other thing that I'll add is that psychological safety of like, it's so fascinating that these people went and did extra work.
Yeah.
Because of the fear of not of being perceived as XYZ, like perception is right.
Yeah. At Profit, we have what we call a human-centered transformation model. That's how we operate. And one of the main reasons I came to Profit is really for this take and for the rich expertise that we have at Profit around organizational behavior and human behavior. And the human-centered transformation model is really talking about there's a core DNA to the business, and then there's a body, mind, and soul to the business. And so you have to treat the business like it's a human. And then you also have to look at the individual human. So we go in whenever there's a change happening, and we assess change readiness. And then we think about the culture of the business, what needs to be top down, what needs to be bottom up. How are you measuring the change? So what are the incremental change measures that you can put in place to see progress? And so that you get from people going from I hear it to I maybe see how it affects me, I believe it, and then I can live it. And so those are the ways that we think about change at Profit.
Oh, I think that's a really helpful framework for our listeners in terms of how, like, you've got to start somewhere. I'm a big believer in simplicity is key. Like, you don't need the crazy multi-page deck like frameworks of how to keep it simple. We're all humans at the end of the day. Now, resilience, as I said, is another sort of essential ingredient of the future readiness recipe because it equips you with this ability to overcome challenges, continuously evolve, and maintain progress in the face of adversity, which, newsflash, there's a lot of in our modern world, and it's all about how you look at it, right? And you said, I love this, that innovation has to do with a culture that embraces change. It's more of a mindset than a moment of choice. Again, so I think this is really germane to what we've been talking about. And this really speaks to me because I'm often reminding leaders, as I said, that future readiness is a way of being. It's not one and done. So you're not just going to check it off your list and dust it out like when you're doing your budgets for the next year. And you've talked about this model to change. So what are some barriers to embracing change that you've experienced? And what maybe some more specific steps can leaders take to instill this mindset that embraces it and cultivates resilience within their teams?
Yeah, I think the barriers are definitely around mindset or being put for people who feel like they're being put in a box. And oftentimes that can come from leadership down. It's like, this is your swim lane. This is your swim lane. Never the two swim lanes should cross. I think we talk about, in general, we talk about collaboration all the time. Everyone talks about collaboration, but oftentimes that collaboration is, I am going to tell you my ideas and you're going to tell me your ideas. And then we're going to listen to each other's ideas and then we're going to leave and it doesn't matter. And collaboration really has to be about putting yourself in each other's shoes and thinking through different things. But the company has to have, the culture has to have a mindset that is, you can go outside of your box. You don't have to stay in the place that you're sitting, right? Open your cubicle walls in a very literal and figurative way.
Yeah.
And so I think other companies have done a lot to push on that and prove that over the years. But when we all sat down on March 12th of 2020 and went, oh crap, now what do we do with our lives? I think that the people who were able to pivot quickly, the companies who were able to pivot quickly, and you saw a lot of this. At the time, I was leading CPG vertical for my former employer, and the companies that were able to quickly pivot, like, massively succeeded, right? But also the companies that were ready for that pivot. So I'll take Best Buy as a great example. Former client of Profit, not that we had something to do with this, but they actually had already been testing curbside. And so they were kind of like, this might be a thing. We're going to run some tests. And because they had piloted it, when this happened, they were able to stand it up quickly. And so they had not only, I wasn't behind the scenes, but I imagine they had not only thought through like how to like do this, operate it, like what's the business value of it, but they'd actually probably run scenarios, they'd piloted at a couple stores, and they were able to just quickly deploy that. So I think what I'm getting to in a very long-winded way is that this readiness for change requires that you're in a constant state of experimentation, that you're allowing your folks to think outside the box, that you're thinking through what else can we try? What can we do? What is the scenario? And I've worked with clients who do scenario planning by sitting down with a spreadsheet and thinking through every possible risk thing that could happen. But I think it's more about like less about the risks of what could happen and more about, because who would have ever come up with that one? Not me, not the CDC. So then if you're sitting down and thinking more about what could be, how could things be better? And I personally just have that constant mindset. Every interaction I come in with in a store or seeing in a car or anything I interact with, I'm just constantly in a state of like, how could this be better? Maybe I'm just inherently lazy. But I was like, how can this be easier to drive? How can this be easier
it's that curiosity. It's that curiosity. I share that as well. And I always tell, what if and what could be are two of the most powerful questions you can ask. I don't care if it's in a business context or even your personal life. And that's what kind of starts to fuel this sort of curiosity, experimentation, exploration lens. I think it's really powerful how at Profit you look at it also through the lens of not keeping people in lanes and boxes. And frankly, that's why I fled working corporate gigs many years ago, because I don't thrive in the boxes. So we talked about this before we kicked off this interview. I gotta be in the messy, ambiguous middle, and like where the energy is. And while I recognize that everybody's that way, I do think there's a lot of power in that and taking that approach.
Yeah, exactly. And it just has to be encouraged culturally, in an ongoing way. And I think companies need to invest in it. It seems odd, but it goes back to that curiosity and that learning mindset of you have to look around the corners and think about what might we need to know that we don't know now. And then when you have those moments of what could be, what if, it's like, what needs to be true for that to happen, right? And that's when you start to do things. And then I think the other thing is just this optimism needs to be present. And the longer we go through our careers, and I try to talk to a lot of the younger team members that I work with, like, you need to reflect back on what you've done. And the last 2 years have been tough in the consulting business. We all know it's all over the news. And so a lot of what I'm doing is coaching folks. I'm like, look, I survived the dot-com bubble. I survived 2008, like all these things. And, a part of it is an optimism, right? Part of it's luck, but it's how do you just sit down and say, when things are tough and I'm discouraged, how do I sit back and reflect on things that I've done? And I am inherently, I get bored easy, maybe. I think I need things to move quickly. I'm impatient. So when I have to slow down because the market's slowing and things, I like to look back and I'm like, gosh, I have done some really interesting things in my career that came about at moments of change, moments that maybe I was feeling like, oh, I don't know if I can weather this storm. And then something else will come along. And so when you've got that kind of set in your mind, it's harder when you're younger, but that something else will come along and be open to it. I think that's really critical.
Well, I think I'm an optimist too. I share that. And it's like also just having faith in the future and the future's possibilities. And what's coming up for me is that at the end of the day, and again, this is what I was hitting on earlier, we have a choice. We're all thinking adults There's complexity in all of our lives. Very few people don't have something going on. And we all get out of bed every day and we have a choice of how we're going to view things. What is our mindset and how are we going to frame whatever it is happening? That's why I go back to fear, ego, and laziness, because I think those are the things, either one or some combination thereof, that is getting in the way. And so the more that you can address those, which, hey, listen, it took me 6 years of psychotherapy and executive coaching I'm legit. I talk about this very openly all the time, to rewire who I am and how I move through this world. And so that's how I know, because I've actually walked the journey of, okay, how am I going to wake up every day, even when things are hard, with just this hopeful, optimistic perspective. I do think it bodes well for me in terms of being someone who is always future ready and able to change, which is a foundational requirement in modern society, right?
It is. And I think to look forward, sometimes not to be cliche, but you have to look back, right? And when you feel like looking forward feels tough or insurmountable, look back, because I guarantee you there's something back there that was previously insurmountable that you overcame, or most likely pushed through to some really interesting success. And I think that is, I keep a little analog in my head of all of these moments, or little pieces of feedback that I get from people or clients, and just lock those away to refer back to whenever I feel like I'm losing that resilience. And I think those exercises are really important.
Yeah, reflection is key. I'm constantly reflecting, right? There's so much wisdom in what you learn by doing it. And so I'm very intentional about it. In fact, I call them rest and digests. So that's actually what I'm doing. I'm going to Montauk for the July 4th holiday. And part of what I will be doing is rest and digesting, both from a reflection standpoint, as well as I also use it to get my nervous system in the right context to harness my imagination and intuition. So that when I go in, and it just really, that becomes a superpower as well. And I think the mindset thing, I just came across this and I thought this was mind blowing. So there was recently an ink piece, and it's about Microsoft, their new CEO, Satya Nadella. So Microsoft just became the most valued company in the world, and it's thanks to psychology and not tech. And what the CEO talks about is why a growth mindset, which is the belief that you can develop your abilities, intelligence, and talents through dedication, effort, and perseverance, and empathy, are the reason why Microsoft is back on top. I think that is double, triple click under that.
Definitely read his book too.
I haven't yet.
Pretty profound leader.
I can add that to my rest and digest Montauk reading list. So
yes.
Amazing. Well, speaking of looking backwards, so you shared a Wall Street Journal podcast episode about Dr. Pepper's journey over many decades. Now they've recently tied Pepsi for the #2 spot in the soda category. And you made the comment that it was a masterclass in sticking to strategy and kind of continuing to execute with excellence for the long term. And there's just so much that I love about this story. I mentioned to you before, when we first started chatting, I'm a historical nonfiction nerd, but I think it's really brilliant how Dr. Pepper adapted to the trends. They pursued industry counterintuitive tactics. So, for example, they captured people through new flavors and converted them to regular Dr. Pepper drinkers, which the rest of the soda biz is no, this is it's like a stunt, or it's like a PR thing. And so I'm curious, how are you balancing maintaining a long-term strategy to strategically position profit to thrive in the future? And how many leaders apply this sort of slow and steady wins the race philosophy?
The thing I love about profit, and I think that the thing that makes profit so great, right, is it is grounded in these strategic insights that come from the customer, the consumer, the human, and it's tied to business results. So I've worked in design firms, I've worked in agencies. We all talk about business results, but profit's really tied to that end outcome of the business having real, sustainable, transformative growth, right? And so you look at examples from our history, like the T-Mobile example is one that Profit's well known for. T-Mobile, the uncarrier, coming up with that strategy was Profit. And to get there, we really had to dig into the consumer insight, which is most of these telecom carrier, like the way the arrangement works is not great for consumers. And in order to break through from being number 4 or 5 to going up against the big guns, we had to do something very, very different.
Yeah, there's
And
a
so
lot of
I
friction
think,
there.
yeah, and Profit has grown and evolved over its lifespan of over 20 years. And we continue to add on new services and offerings. We've gone from a very consultant driven brand strategy. We've added in creative, we've added in experience, but we now are really bringing all of those things together to think about like, how are we driving impact at the CEO suite and at the CMO suite? So we've kind of been in that CMO space, but CEOs are the ones that are saying like, our brand, our ethos has to change in order for us to be ready for the next wave of growth that should come our way. And so that we're really sitting at that table, helping those clients think about that kind of impactful growth in a measurable way. So that's really, I think, how Profit's sticking to their long-term strategy, even as we evolve and grow against that.
I think it's important to highlight is you talked about longevity from in terms of how Profit looks at it is you start with the humans, the insight, the customer. You said the T-Mobile example. What I heard was, it's like, what are these like long problems, these long standing issues, right? And how can we start to solve them? One of my former podcast guests, she said the smartest thing ever. She was, because I was like, what does future readiness mean to you? And she was like, listen, the customer insights is a trend that will never go out of style. And I was like, brilliant, because it's so true. If you're trying to figure out, because there's lots of places you can look for insights, there's lots of, and it can be complicated. There's a lot of inputs that you can take. So if you don't know where to start with the humans because chances are you're going to land. There's so many problems to solve, many of them long-standing and full of friction. And so I just think that's a really, really smart way for leaders to start to take a crack at it in terms of how they're, evolving and innovating their company and their model. So now,
one of the things I love about a lot of my Profit coworkers is that you'll see them go into a store, go into a place of business and just start talking to the people that work there. Like, what's your job like? What do your customers not like? And I'm like, are you just shopping? And they're just asking all these questions. But that brings back so it's that very inquisitive, curious mindset that they bring to everything. And I think it's in the ethos of who Profit is.
Yeah.
And the reason that we've always been just really, really profoundly good at understanding the customer side of the business. And many other consultants come at it in a very different way. It's like business reflection or industry reflection and cost out and that sort of thing. And we're like, no, you could grow if you just really understood the heart of the customers you're going after.
Yeah, that empathy is everything. And walking in someone else's shoes for a bit, you'd be surprised what you uncover, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
So now William Gibson famously said, this is one of my favorite quotes, the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. And that quote really resonates with me because it underscores that the future is right in front of us if we are really looking. And it taps into the essential nature of what I do, for example, as a futurist. One of the things I practice is called foresight, but it highlights the importance of being really in tune to emerging signals and subtle, shifts that signal what's next. Now, Profit helps leaders unlock uncommon growth that's purposeful, transformational, and sustainable. You said that earlier. I love that. But this work is not for the faint of heart, right? And so what gaps or difficulties are you facing when anticipating and strategizing for Profit's future? And what wisdom would you offer for our leaders who are listening, who we know are struggling with similar challenges?
Yeah, I think Profit suffers from many of the challenges that our clients or other businesses out there and the audience is really being able to sense the direction of the market and be on top of that and pivot to those things. Like Gen AI is on the mouth of everyone out there. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what is our value proposition generative AI and where do we play? And we keep bringing it back to it needs to align to our strategy. So we really need to think about what it means for our customers. And so when you start to unpack that, it's like all the businesses that are like starting to get overly excited or anxious about what Gen AI needs to do to the business, it still really needs to be grounded in those humans. And for me, when I think about future, and I play in the tech space, obviously a lot. I think technology is driving a lot of the change that we're all facing in our lives, among other things. But I like to look at it in the lens of how is this actually going to affect human life, right? Yeah. And then you come to suss out the things that are like versus the things that you're like, okay, this is legit, right? This is gonna change things for us. And I think one of my favorite examples of that is the metaverse, right? Sorry, no offense to Mark Zuckerberg, but when that several years ago, when it was like, oh, the metaverse, and we're gonna they changed the name to Meta, I was just like, I just don't see it, right? And I worked with one of my favorite clients of my past is IBM. I worked with them for a number of years, and IBM has always been ahead of the curve, obviously, in technology, as well as the way they work with their employees. So one of the first companies to really dive into crowdsourcing employee values and that sort of thing. But back in 2002, we were helping them. Yeah, we were helping them create virtual events in Second Life, which was the first metaverse, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, members, they were already a distributed workforce. They were already working from home. They're way ahead of the curve and all of these things. And it was interesting, but the experience was like, it still felt weird. Sure. Yeah, you still lose that empathetic human connection, and you're still not quite right. So you fast forward into another version of metaverse or anything with the glasses on. It doesn't feel natural to humans, right?
No.
But then you look at Gen AI, and it's actually AI, first of all, has been around for a long time. Machine learning, all of these things have been improving our lives for a very long time. Right. This is just the next iteration of it, where it's generative. And so, of course, it is going to be the next wave of digital transformation. And of course, businesses need to be in front of it, but it also has to be through the lens of that human, whether it's your employee or it's your customer. How is this impacting your life? How is it making better versus, and this is where to be careful of all the talk right now is of these bad experiences where people are using the tools and getting really bad results. Being grounded in understanding the right use cases that are going to drive impact is the way to move forward with all of these things. And so I think it's just this balance of being able to look to the future of what's coming and then balance that with the current reality.
Well, the element of time travel that resonates with me because I feel like I'm constantly living in the past, the present, and the future, and in my work and in my life. And I always start, as I would say, stop thinking present forward, start thinking future back, because that's one of the biggest mistakes I see leaders making. And then the big takeaway that I have from what you just said is I tend to, some people think this is provocative, but my opinion is that tech is trendy. Tech is a trend. And so the advice I always offer for leaders is start with the fundamental human needs that we all share, right? Because those are enduring, right? And those, whether that's belonging, whether that's security, if you even just pick one of those, I think there's seven big, it's like the Maslow's hierarchy. If you start with it, pick like one area to play in, and the amount of businesses and problems that could be solved, new business models that you could derive from that is like limitless, literally.
Yes.
So I love that. Now, is there anything else you'd like to add before we bring our conversation to a close?
No, I think for me, it's as I reflect on this conversation, as I told you, I like to reflect on things. I got very excited about this. I feel like this notion of finding ways to push yourself out of your comfort zone on a regular basis is really, really critical. We are all very, very busy. We have our lives, so we have to do things. Unless you sit in a position like you or I sit, you're not always in a situation where you get to future cast. You have to think about what's exciting, what's coming next. And so I think this idea of making time for that, getting out of the mundane. And I talked to some of the more junior folks on my teams about this is like they're managing work, right? We work in like 12 to 14 week sprints, engagements. And so they're in it and they're very focused on getting the things done. And I often say, just lift your head up, listen to a podcast, get inspired by something that has absolutely nothing to do with what you're doing today, because it's going to bring value to what you're doing, but it's also going to help you be prepared for what's next.
Yeah. Well, I remind people too, it's like even simple like changes to your routine can start like a cascading effect of like behavior change. And as you're, okay, I'm going to take a different route to work. It sounds so dumb, but like research backs all this up. You do that, then you open yourself up to bumping up against new information, new people. And then that's going to start the way that from cognitive science and neuroscience, it starts happening in your brain. Suddenly you come back to the problem that you're solving or the project that you're working on with a different lens or a different insight. And so, I think that keeping your head up and engaging with the world is super important.
Yeah, exactly. And you bring me to one other little point that I'll add is when I recently relocated to Atlanta, I made it a priority and I pushed myself to just go and meet a lot of other people, mostly women, I'll be honest, but I'm in chief. And I use that as a way in to get introductions and meet folks. And I'm intentional about saying yes when people ask to have a meeting, and also setting up meetings and getting out and having coffee. I think we all got a little stayed by sitting here in our screens, but I'm a social person, but I also tend to be social within my small network. And so I'm really pushing myself to go out and meet new people and get more diverse thought. And I think that's really, really critical. Especially the older I get, the more I find this to be very necessary.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to learn and from whom.
Exactly.
In your view, is preparing for the future more about managing risks or capitalizing on opportunities?
Oh God, capitalizing on opportunities. I don't manage any risk.
Love it.
Don't tell my insurance company, but no, I am all about capitalizing opportunity. I love it. One of my girlfriends recently said, I'm in my era of yes. And I love that. I'm like, yes, I'm in my era of yes as well.
Love that. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and your brilliant insights. There were so many helpful tips and frameworks for folks. So it has been enlightening and I have learned so much from you today. So thank you again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Regan. That was great. Thanks for having me. Have a good one.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Future Fit. If you're listening, you're probably future curious. So follow me in my newsletter on LinkedIn to keep the conversation going and share your discoveries with the Future Fit community. And if you enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe, rate, and review Future Fit on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time.